Hello everybody, welcome to my house here in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh. My name is Lorna McGhee and I'm here with Professor Alberto Almarza, and welcome to my home. And we both teach at CMU, and I would love to start off by asking Alberto to talk a little bit about his perspective about Marcel Moyse in the historical context.
Great. It's lovely to be here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Lorna, for hosting this. The first thing I wanted to bring up in this conversation is about the two aspects of the historical legacy of Marcel Moyse. And one is that he was one of those musicians that connected, like Fritz Kreisler and Pablo Casals, one century to the next one. He moved to Paris in 1904 to study at the Paris Conservatoire. And so all his teachers were people that were some of the most important flutists of their time, but they were all rooted on the previous century. And so one important thing, I think, is that for us, some of the people that were in contact with him, is that really they were creating this connection. And I think that was one of the important elements of his legacy, that he was this bridge between centuries. And the other historical aspect that I think is also very important is the fact that he was somebody who brought the European tradition to the US. And before the US, he was in Argentina for a short period of time, right after the war. And so this is a person that created also this cultural bridge, which I find fascinating. It gave the United States this connection and this sense of, to American flutists, that sense of belonging to the great tradition that he inherited in France. But it opened that tradition to the people in the States, as well as in Argentina. There are people that are still in Argentina that side with him. And so I think those two elements, these bridges that he created, are probably one of the big reasons why he was so transformational.
Mm-hmm. Really international influence.
Yeah.
I had no idea about the Argentinian connection.
Yeah, it was a short time, and then he moved to Marlborough after that. It didn't work very well for him, apparently. It was a difficult time in Argentina right after the war. But he lived there, he had students, and until recently, one of his students was still teaching in Mendoza, Argentina. Wow. So it's a legacy that goes, multinational. I think that when we look at today's careers, I mean, look at us. We were both welcome to this country as foreigners, and I think Moyse is one of those people that started that trend of flutists to travel around, the wanderer flutists that have ended up being a way of careers today. But at his time, it wasn't like that. It was way more nationalistic in the sense that you were in one place and that was your place and you stayed there. But some people started creating these kind of traveling musicians and the flute. It had happened before with pianists and violin players and singers.
A little bit with Barrère as well, and
yes.
With Tabuteau on the oboe.
And the oboe, yes. Exactly. But that's pretty much the same generation. Tabuteau and going to Philadelphia was that guy that in the oboe did that Moyse did in the US as well.
Did you ever meet Moyse?
No. And I understand you didn't either, right? Yeah.
No. So my appreciation of Moyse comes very much through William Bennett, who was my teacher for many years. And it's really beautiful to reflect on his relationship with Moyse. I mean, he really was so incredibly inspired by Marcel Moyse, and he tells stories about when he was a young man and he heard recordings of Moyse for the first time, and how that just changed his whole way of thinking, and he really wanted to get to France to study there with Moyse, which he eventually had the opportunity to do that. So I think what I got from Wib was this wonderful, and something that Wib did in his own teaching, had this wonderful vitality and the idea of bringing the music to life, that it was the most important thing to tell a story and to communicate with your playing, not merely to be technical just a good instrumentalist. And we'll talk about all the fundamentals that build up that storytelling ability, because it's not something you just dream up and it happens. I mean, you sort of need to learn certain skills, so Moyse was very attuned to listening to string players like Adolf Busch, with whom he started Marlborough, and also great singers, because he spent time in the opera, and so he wrote his beautiful book, Tone Development Through Interpretation. So it was very much a conscious and intentional fostering of phrasing, skills of phrasing beautifully, and of creating a tone that was always alive. William Bennett would say this, that he would quote Moyse as saying, "The sound must always be smiling." Or to get a great legato, one of his phrases was, it must be like stirring the mayonnaise, homemade mayonnaise, but just having that. So I mean, that's something we could talk about, this attention and this absolute insistence on the tone being full of vitality, vibrancy, aliveness, and also the way that you move between notes, stirring the mayonnaise, that quality of carrying the sound, carrying the life force, carrying the vitality of the phrase through the intervals.
How was that communicated to you by William Bennett? Was it clear? Was he clearly stating this is the legacy or this is the teaching of Moyse, or it was presented to you as his own fusion of both worlds, or how was it?
Well, both. I mean, sometimes he would directly quote Moyse, with, like, for example, the sound must always be smiling. He would say, Moyse would say. So sometimes you got that direct transmission. And then, of course, inevitably, there's a fusion. I mean that was also Wibb's personality, to be a great artist and to be a great communicator and storyteller. Yeah. So that was, but I would say, it was also through the use of materials. So some of my best lessons with William Bennett were on the 24 Easy Melodic Studies of Moyse, and then the tone development through interpretation. Those were my most memorable lessons. So that was a specific, here is what I was taught by Moyse, and then he would also put his, add his own, personality to it. How could he not?
That seems to be the nature of what we do in achieving the previous generation's knowledge, which is what Moyse did too. Moyse, he inherited the knowledge and the experience and the aesthetics of a previous generation. He conveyed that to people. And I'm asking you because one thing that I found very interesting is that among many flutists that studied with him, as with many other great flutists, do not play exactly the same way. The style changes. The style is different now than what it used to be.
Yes, and Moyse doesn't sound like Gobert. When you listen to old recordings of Gobert, and I know that, for example, Wibb really loved also listening to Louis Fleury, and Dufresne, people like that, and of course Joseph Mariano. So it's not a monolith.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to say that. I mean, you take these tools, you take this inspiration, and everybody has their own voice. Wibb doesn't sound like Moyse.
No.
And Galway doesn't sound. They all have elements that you can hear.
I think it's the beauty of music in general, because it also happens in composition, where you don't just continue to replicate the work of your teachers. You integrate their knowledge, but you add your own experience, and that's how music stays alive and evolves, because the styles have changed dramatically, and yet we can still hear some of those core principles that some of these great masters have created or brought up to our attention.
Yeah, when I think about my understanding of Moyse, and also from listening to his recordings, this vitality is the word that comes to mind. But I also think just such an incredible ability to listen deeply.
Yeah.
So, when you're spinning a phrase, where are you really going? Really attending to that, not halfway, but really attending to that. And then also in terms of listening to string players, how great string players use vibrato to enhance the phrase rather than it just being a sort of decoration in the sound.
Yeah, and that was so evident. I as I said, I never met him, but I did study with people that met him, and also I have seen a lot of his videos and the master classes in Marlborough and all that. And one thing that always attracted me was that he was constantly referring to string playing and to singers. So I think that is also part of the heritage, and the singing part particularly important for us, in that so much of what we do, like singers, is a product of body awareness. How you manage your body to produce sound. The singers do it internally. We need the machine outside to produce that, but the attitude is very similar. And I think he was very, very clear on that. There's a connection, a direct connection in terms of good quality phrasing and management of the sound that is rooted on that awareness.
And color, and to get a very human quality to instrumental playing.
Yeah, interesting. For me, one thing, talking about tone, that was fundamental. When I discovered Moyse, one of my teachers in the National Conservatory in Chile was totally obsessed with this. And so the La Sonorité became our, daily book. And what it was very interesting for me to see was that the philosophy behind this was that tone is the palette. Tone is the canvas. And so it's the canvas. Tone is where you have your palette of colors, and all can be presented on this frame. And it was more than just awareness in observing tone, it was devotion to tone.
Yeah, love of it, love of the sound. Yes.
Yeah. I felt that was kind of a revelation for me, even though I came from a musician's family, and my dad as a flutist and composer had clearly that idea as well, and yet the way it was so systematically organized was what it made the difference. So for me, it was the revelation that these fundamental blocks of music making, which is tone, can be studied. It could be analyzed, and you gain command of it by studying it separately from the rest. Now, that was the first level of what he did. He separated tone from any other practicing. Now, the genius, I think, was that he also connected it with tone, with phrasing. So, on some of his exercises, you are contemplating just tone, how the sound is produced. There's a story of him, and I think it's true. One of his students had memories of a lesson where for 90 minutes they were working on a B. So I believe it's true. It sounds to me like that. But what he did later in some of his exercises was to start working with the connection of intervals and making the specific point that it is there where you have the fundamental phrase construction. How you connect, how one note relates to the next one is where phrasing happens. And I thought it was quite interesting to see the two worlds. One that separates the tone from everything else.
Do you mean just like in De La Sonorité? So that's just pure
pure observation and kind of, as you said, love for tone. Just tone as an element of beauty in itself.
And to cultivate that.
Yeah, cultivate it's devotion. It's a devotion to this thing, that this little moment where that tone is happening. But in many of his other exercises, he's working with intervals. And I remember seeing some of his classes where he was talking about jumps. How you jump from one note to another. And that's a fundamental understanding related to singers, violin players, the portamento kind of feeling of not interrupting the airflow.
That's right.
And creating that connection, which is a fundamental principle of good phrasing.
Yeah, and one of the books that I think is really amazing in that respect is How I Stayed in Shape.
Yeah.
How I Maintained My Form. And, and that's full of leaps and intervals and the flexibility and the elasticity and the connection with the breath.
Yeah.
Through big intervals and just having that command and not cutting the air. There's what I also really got from Moyse's sort of the model of the way he approached things was, I do this myself. It is you practice all these things separately, and then you put them together. So all his technique books, the daily exercises, the scales that I make my students do in fourths and thirds, and then I actually like his book School of Articulation. And just having great articulation through all the registers. So I really like. I think I read somewhere that he'd said, don't practice technique on pieces. Like basically most of my practice is tone and technique, and then a little bit of repertoire. Because you get all your ducks in a row, and then it's so much easier to play your pieces.
Yes.
And then you can just concentrate on the music. You're not trying to work out technical problems on a piece.
Exactly.
Like you already come to it with the knowledge and the tools.
One of the interesting things I find that, going back to what you said, that studying technique and sound separately from the repertoire. And it reminds me, even though they were, not connected, my own teacher, Julius Baker, talking about the fact that what the goal should be, that you develop a command of the instrument in terms of sound and technique that you can then apply to the repertoire. It's not that you learn these skills on the repertoire, but you learn them separately, and then you bring that level of instrumental command to the repertoire. And it creates magic things, because now you are not that busy trying to learn technique on the repertoire.
Exactly.
You have the technique and the sound that you are only applying. And that was a principle that I love, how he managed to make it very systematic and pedagogical. All his books are an example of that. How gradually you build these skills and then you apply them.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly helpful and smart and just intelligent. You're not distracted by technical obstacles. When you're playing music.
Yeah.
And you have the skills.
But he also did the transition in his books. Like the tone development through interpretation is a good example, where you have the transition between the pure technical sound exercise to these melodies that now you can start applying all these resources that you have mastered through the work that you did before. But now gradually they migrate into real music.
That's right.
And he did all the process, every single step is there.
That's right.
Yeah.
One other thing I think is worth mentioning is the influence on non-flute players as well, because I have friends, bassoon players, horn players who did chamber music with Moyse at Marlborough. And still to this day, those are some of the most memorable music-making experiences and inspiring experiences. So I think for all wind players, it was a great source of inspiration.
Yeah, and he transcended the flute.
Yeah.
He was able to speak to people in a much deeper language than just the flute talk. It was a much more, it's a deeper connection to music that it was evident to anybody that was there.
Very artistic and creative and imaginative. Also, when you hear him in masterclass, it's just his imagination is wonderful. His metaphors. Hello, everyone. I thought I'd just take a few moments and share with you some of the specific ways that I use Marcel Moyse's training and his lineage as it was passed down to me from Lib. So I think it's just quite nice to share the specific things. So first of all, of course, de la sonorité, long tones. But one of the other things from de la sonorité, this one, that exercise, the way it was taught to us through WIB was to do very, very, very extreme tapers. So you start on your main note, so in this case a B, and then you do a huge diminuendo, and WIB would ask us to do almost imperceptible on the second note. So like that, and so it's really getting the airstream down and then up, down, up. Michi Bennett would have said cover, uncover. So it depends, whatever language you want to use, to lift the airstream. So, and then vibrato, and then no vibrato. Etc., etc., etc. And of course, trying not to cut the air when you do those leaps. And then you do it the other way around. So you return to the main note with a huge diminuendo. And it's quite an extreme way of practicing the tapers, but it just gives you so much control. So of course you do both of those, and then just the regular da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da. Something that I love to do with the de la sonorité, with the long notes, and this is something I sort of learned also from Galway. So of course the substance of doing the long tones is to find your best sound and then to carry it through into the second note and to keep sustaining that beautiful sound. But Galway would take it a little bit further. So it's the same principle, but not just on two notes. You would eventually take it down a whole scale. So sometimes I love to just do an E flat major scale. Etc., etc., etc. And that's sort of going back to what Alberto was saying about, finding the bridges between just a purely technical command into melody and into expression. So some of the other things that I use, of course, the tone development through interpretation of melodies, but also the exercises themselves. I make my students do a technique exam where we do some of these exercises as part of the exam. So etc., etc. So it's at the back of tone development and really thinking crescendo to the bottom notes. So again, sound in motion, really trying to connect between the notes. That wasn't a great example, but it shows you at least the framework. And then the opposite one going up into the high register. So this is on page 76 of tone development, and you do the opposite here. So guiding the airstream into the flute on the way down, and then off the lip plate on the way up. an example of some of the flexibility work that I love to do. I do a little bit of that every day myself. Let's see. For my students, I get them to do the Moyse daily exercises. So that's your scales in thirds, straight scales, chromatics, whole tones, diminished sevenths, augmented fifths, triads, chords of the seventh, majors, minors. I think that's everything. In straight ahead, and then also in thirds, and then also in fourths. And we do that spread out over several years. But also, the requirement for that is to play with your absolute best sound, so that you're getting an incredible sound through the whole, all three registers of the flute. We often hear a wonderful middle register, but not very good high register, or not very good low register. So just trying to bring the quality to everything. Let's see. I love to do the 24 easy melodic studies, and the specific things here are practicing varying the vibrato. So the vibrato is never just a constant. It's helping to enhance the phrase. So in the first one, I only teach mostly the first 6 of the 24. And the way I was taught the first one, you accelerate the vibrato towards the peak of the phrase. Oh, how I love you. And the most vibrato on the note of most emphasis, which is the love. And then as you resolve, not cancelling out your phrase by having constant vibrato, but as you resolve, lessening the speed of the vibrato. Happy tone, smiling sound. So some other things in this, building your phrases. So the phrases are talking to one another. They're not just one good phrase after another, but there's some sort of coherent narrative there. So you develop the sound more on the second phrase. And you might diminish a little bit less on that one. And then the third phrase, you sing through even more. One of the other things that Wick taught was the repeated notes. Without cutting the air, you taper a little bit on the first E. And as you rearticulate with more vibrato, so that it's very eloquent and articulate. So it's not... so it's not mush, and neither is it sort of cut. So just having the skill to not cut the air, but to nevertheless articulate and be clear and enunciate. And so the skill of that is in the taper and then the vibrato as well. And Whip would talk about, I don't know if this is a Moyse thing, I think it probably is, getting a reaction in the sound. So on the repeated note, you get a reaction in the sound. Also, you practice your repeated notes on the variation. So there's that little taper, and reaction. So hierarchy of the beats was another big thing. Of course, this is nothing new to all the Moyse Society people, but also practicing the tapers on diminuendos. For example, in the variation of number 4. So that is another application going right from de la sonority, where you practice those individual tapers, and then you put that into a melody. So you're able to still show the framework of the melody on those bottom notes and putting the top ones into the background. So this idea of foregrounding and backgrounding and creating texture is all from these technical skills of tapering and getting the reaction in the sound and not cutting the air. So I won't go into depth about all of the tone development, the little melodies, but those are some of the things. And really looking at each one as a character study. So you're getting your technical skills, your eloquence, in being able to express yourself, also in the framework of these very simple melodies. So that really teaches you how to play phrases. How I stayed in shape. This one I do basically every day. Trying to get your octaves in tune and not cutting the breath, and having the elasticity here. So I do that through different keys every day. What else? I'm sure I'm going to forget stuff. I love this school of articulation. And I also do it on cup. And I think I've run out of ideas. I think that's everything I can think of. but those are just very specific. Like, just it makes up a lot of my practice every day. And then, you know, when you've got your scales and fourths, trying to carry the sound. So sometimes just practicing them on the breath there on ha ha ha, and then joining it all together, sustaining that. So just like we were doing on the De La Sonority. And trying to get that smiling sound so that it doesn't just go dead and like that. Just it doesn't go dead and technical. So the smiling sound and the liveliness always.